Week 1 of the NFL preseason is in the books, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Ravens Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Samuel Njoku. 24 straight wins for the Baltimore Ravens. It is a feat that has not been achieved ever in the NFL, and for good reason. Nobody cares. But John Harbaugh cares. That means we care. They barely squeaked by the Philadelphia Eagles 20-19, former NFC champion winners. So it's a big deal in their book. They want to make sure that they get everything under control as far as bringing a winning culture to the Baltimore Ravens, and that's good for them. We'll have all of that and more. We'll talk about how the Ravens have done just enough to pique my interest in this Ravens offense as far as 2023 is concerned. We'll also have Ken McKusick, who's the host of the FilmStudy podcast, and also the 105.7 The Fan analyst that helps them out with Ravens coverage over there in Baltimore as well. But first, we have to talk about tragic news as former Ravens running back Alex Collins died tragically in a motorcycle accident. My thoughts and prayers are out to his family. I've spoken with players, coaches alike, as well as some fans who talk about how impactful he has been to their lives and in the community. So our condolences go out to the Collins family. In other Ravens news, former Ravens player Michael Orr is also in some legality battles with his own family, the Tui family. If you know him from The Blind Side, the movie and the book, then you know that that family adopted him and helped him on his path to the National Football League, but not so fast as Michael Orr. Apparently, the family didn't adopt him in the first place. It was some sort of conservatorship that caused some ripples in the family as of late as Michael Orr just became knowing of that fact recently. So apparently the Tui family says that there was a bit of a shakedown where Michael Orr has attempted to request $15 million to make up for the money that was supposedly gained by the Tui family from the book and movies. That's kind of crazy, to say the least. Hopefully that's not the case. The Tui family says that those claims are absurd. So there's two sides to that story. I just know talking to Michael Orr back when he was a Raven, he would tell anybody ad nauseum that he did not care for that movie or that book. He doesn't believe that was portrayed in a very good light. He was portrayed in a very good light, I should say. So that's something that should be taken of note. But my hopes are that for whatever reason, whatever happens, that is straightened out as a family squabble that seems to have become public. Hopefully the family wasn't right of mind when they decided to do the conservatorship. They did mention that he was 18 years of age when that sort of thing came to pass. But based on the book, I think he was a little younger than that. So I'm not sure how much validity those claims are. But regardless, I hope that works out for them. Works out for the best because I believe from reading the books that what they did was a great thing. Some people may think it was a little bit racist having a white family come in and take care of a black man and show that, only a white family can help a black athlete get into the National Football League. But I didn't see it that way. I thought that the family did a great job in bringing up someone who was, for all intents and purposes, homeless, and then all of a sudden did what he had to do in college and made his way to the NFL. So for the best, I hope both parties can make sure that they get through everything okay and move on from there. In other football news related to the actual Baltimore Ravens of 2023, Marlon Humphrey is out indefinitely. We don't know when he's coming back. Apparently there was a foot injury with Marlon Humphrey that has been lingering on for quite some time. Coach John Harbaugh didn't give media the details on that, but it looks like he'll be having surgery as early as today, as of this recording. We don't know when he's going to be back, but if you've seen that corner depth for the Baltimore Ravens, you know that is not good news at all. Rocket Sim hasn't been seen for who knows how long dealing with a knee injury. The Ravens don't know who their third corner is, and we'll touch on that a little bit later on as far as the first preseason game is concerned, but that is a huge blow. The Ravens have one or two solid pass rushers. Really, solid's a strong word considering none of these guys have really made much of an impact besides a sack here or there throughout last season. So it's big news for the Ravens, and I'm assuming Eric DeCosta is going to be on the phone talking to the other GMs, trying to get some talent over there. Because if they don't get some pass rush help or some significant corner depth help, they're going to be pigs for the slaughter come the start of the season. John Harbaugh did say that he expects him back sometime, but we've heard John Harbaugh spin that wheel before. I don't really trust John as it comes to medical analysts. He'll say whatever just to get you off his case. He's not really an MD or any PT for that matter, and he doesn't claim to be. So don't put much merit in that. I expect him to be back, but whether or not it's going to be in September or October is anyone's guess. And those foot injuries are very tricky for corners. So tough sledding for the Ravens so far in the early part of 2023. Moving on to the preseason game. The Ravens won 2019. I thought the streak was over. I'm not going to lie to you. The Eagles were looking very strong in the first half, but as I've said all along, the preseason is all about depth. It's your 2s and 3s versus my 2s and 3s, especially in the first preseason. And the Ravens just showed out in the second half. Anthony Brown got the start early on and didn't look very good. Nope, not good at all. And he's a backup quarterback. And according to John Harbaugh, it looks as though there's a quarterback competition, a backup quarterback competition between him and Tyler Huntley. Didn't seem that way. In the second half, Tyler Huntley came in the game and everything looked crisp, smooth. I mean, Tyler Huntley's a person who actually started in the playoff game last year, so that's to be expected. But for the fact that Harbaugh is still calling this a QB controversy, controversy, competition, I should say, that begs the question why, because Huntley looked way, way better than Brown. But we'll have Ken McKusick later on today, and he'll explain why not so fast. That there may be some merit to John Harbaugh's decision to make this a QB competition. So we're going to move on with the preseason 1 game and actually take a look at players who I thought did really, really well and some who did not so well. We'll go with studs and duds. That's a term that's used very often online, but I like it, so I'm gonna keep it for myself. One stud I love, Zay Flowers. Oh my goodness. This wide receiver makes the addition of OBJ almost feel like obsolete, right? A little bit. More is better, but of course, Zay Flowers' introduction to this offense has really shown me that Todd Monken better get it together. Todd Monken better show out in this season because, boy, that boy can ball. The way that he moves within the first 3 yards of the line of scrimmage, he really dictates the route before the ball is even snapped, it appears sometimes. He's just burning cornerbacks. He's shifty. It just pure perfection. I don't want to see him in the field again. I know he's a rookie. And I know John Harbaugh wants to get him acclimated to the speed of the National Football League, but save his knees, save his strength. I need that boy ready to go in week 1 because I was exhausted, as I mentioned last episode, in the 2022 campaign. I could not stay awake, but just watching him keeps me up. It could be a touchdown at any given moment. He's something to behold for sure. Another stud of mine who I thought played very, very well. Ooh-wee. Can we talk about Tucker? That 60-yard field goal looked magical in preseason affair, and it looked like it was effortless. It looked magnificent. It was great to see. It seems that he's in regular season form already, postseason form maybe, if you're a Ravens fan. Oh, boy. Tucker looked amazing in that start. And let's talk about the running backs. My third and favorite thing to talk about, the running backs, especially Keaton Mitchell. Keaton Mitchell looked fantastic, an undrafted rookie out of East Carolina University, looking like a Chris Johnson, who also went to East Carolina University, a speedster who projected a 4.3 40 time in the NFL Draft Combine. He looked every bit as fast on the field as he did during that combine. I mean, the knock on Keaton Mitchell is, of course, that he's a little bit slow when it comes to pass protection, and his frame is sub 200, but oh boy, if you can get those playmakers, OBJ, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman on the outside and spread them out and have that single back, oh boy, he can cause some trouble. And you know who saw that? J.K. Dobbins. Because literally 2 days after, less than 48 hours after that performance, he shows up to camp. He shows up and ready to go. He said, I'm not going to lose my job to this kid. Now, I'm not going to lose my job at all. And he's firmly implanted into the starting lineup, of course, but Keaton Mitchell, somebody to watch out for. Of course, there was other. Justice Hill did great. Gus Edwards didn't have much burst, but I'm sure he's saving himself for the regular season. And together, those running backs really did some damage to the Eagles' defensive front. So really, really impressed with what I saw from the running back group. And with J.K. Dobbins, the coaching staff has some decisions to make for sure. For sure. So now on to my duds. Guys who I thought looked not so great. Start out with the obvious, Anthony Brown. He really came in and he didn't really show much as far as talent is concerned. He was 3 for 8, I believe, for 7 yards. Definitely not something you want from your backup QB. But as I mentioned earlier, we'll have Ken to talk about how even though his performance was lacking, doesn't mean that he's out of the woods yet. He might still grab that backup spot over Tyler Huntley. Another dud of mine, did not like to see it. We talked about it with Marlon Humphrey's injury. The corners looked awful. Well, I want to say awful. No one stepped up. There was no one in mind that came into me and said, oh, yeah, he's going to be that slot corner. He's going to perhaps take Rocket Sims' QB2 spot, CB2 spot, I should say. None of that. Just bland football, receivers getting open, receivers in space, no one jumping routes, nobody solidifying themselves in that depth chart battle to take over and really show any of us that they have what it takes to make an impact. But we'll see what happens with preseason 2. We know this is their first game of the preseason, but that was very disappointing in what they put out there. Ben Cleveland, another dud of mine. I mean, coming into the season, we fully expected him to take that guard spot, but now I'm not so sure he's even in line to make the ball club. It's really looking bad for Ben Cleveland. He really was on his back a lot of times during that game. I didn't really see much effort on his part. I'm sure he's trying, but I mean, if you're of that caliber of player coming into the NFL, I expect you to dominate. But that was not the case. All right, folks, when we come back, we'll have Ken McKusick from FilmStudy, the podcast, and also the analyst for 105.7 The Fan to join us and talk some Ravens football. He'll look back at the preseason Week 1 game and also the upcoming game against the Washington Commanders. Up next on Ravens Talk Podcast. All right, welcome back to the Ravens Talk Podcast. We have with us Ken McKusick with FilmStudy, the podcast, and also the 105.7 The Fan analyst. How you doing today, man?
Life's good. How you doing, Sam?
Great. We got football back in Baltimore, so that's one good thing. It's the preseason, but when I was a reporter for the CBS Baltimore and also with the Examiner, I used to love going to training camp and seeing these players perform, especially the second and third stringers as they battle it out to try and find out if they make an NFL roster. But with the first preseason game in the books, Greg Roman's been switched out for Todd Monken. Some fans may have been expecting some fireworks, but instead we got us a slugfest, a 2019 victory over the NFC champ Philadelphia Eagles. How do you feel like the Ravens performed offensively in Week 1?
Some good, some bad, as you say. Without Lamar Jackson, are we really that upset about it? The Philadelphia Eagles played a number of their starters on defense, including a potent set of pass rushers to start the game. And so I think that was part of why Josh Johnson started the game, was that they didn't really want to expose Huntley to that kind of injury risk. Then, of course, he gets injured anyway. And unfortunate, but he missed practice today. Johnson looked very hurried, had a lot of trouble getting off any meaningful passes, and ended up with 3.4 yards per pass. So that's not obviously what you want. Huntley much better off the bench. 8 yards of pass play. Looked like he has taken the lead in the backup quarterback role. Of course, it's more of those first string type players you have to face when you're playing during the regular season. So I don't put too much credence in it. It's a small sample size anyway, but Huntley moved the team well. Johnson actually made a nice touchdown pass, both back shoulder throws in the corner of the end zone, both very nicely placed and caught.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Huntley definitely moved the ball a little bit better than the other two. But as you mentioned, the Eagles do have a potent pass rush. It's what got them to the Super Bowl last year, and it shouldn't be surprising that they had success against the Ravens in the first preseason game. But to piggyback off what you said, that brings up a good point. I spoke earlier about it, but the Ravens did mention that there's a bit of a backup quarterback, a competition. I listened to your podcast a little bit, and even though most people may think that Huntley is the surefire recipient of that backup spot, I believe you don't think so. Not so fast, right?
I'd say it's not 100% sure. I think Huntley took a big lead in this first preseason game. Johnson, he'd been fairly much splitting the reps in practice. Mm-hmm. And, there's three factors in play here at a minimum. One is tenure. So you look at these two guys, and Johnson's been in the league forever. He's 37 years old. I don't know exactly Huntley's age, late 20s, 27, maybe. Mm-hmm. There's about a 10-year difference between the two. That actually is not that important because we're only looking forward to having either of these players on the contract for one season. After that, you pay market value to bring them back. You might be able to get either of them, but you pay market value to bring them back. And, it's $1.5 million difference in cap this year. Those kind of numbers are significant to the Ravens with Lamar on a second contract. I think we would agree that if Lamar goes down, the season is pretty much over for the Baltimore Ravens regardless.
Yeah.
So would you rather just save $1.5 million on your backup quarterback? It's $2.67 million versus 1.17. So that's another thing. And then I think the third thing in terms of the order of deployment, I wouldn't take too seriously in this game. I think if anything, the fact that they started Johnson, not Huntley, was a deferential move to the good young pass rushers that the Eagles played in that game.
I agree completely. And, I was back and forth deciding whether or not the fact that $1 million difference is at play. But given the fact that we've had some rough play at the cornerback position, and we've had a significant cornerback by the name of Marlon Humphrey have foot surgery recently, we may need to bring in guys if you're the Ravens to kind of complement that loss in talent. And $1 million makes a big difference.
Yeah, it's not insignificant. The Ravens have already spent a ton of 2024 cap, primarily on the Odell Beckham signing, but also in void years on 5 different players, including Beckham. That very significant chunk of the 2024 cap has already been spent. I've been a very outspoken critic of going all in any year, and the events of today are exactly why I hate those kind of moves. Is because you still can't predict injuries very well. And the team that looks good in camp that you want to go all in on often will have a critical injury that is just too serious to overcome. So you're better off just taking your chances with a nice levelized talent approach. When the injuries hit, they hit. And you're probably going to be hurt those years no matter what. And in other years, you're going to have a chance to compete. And you don't need to have give yourself the highest chance to have the best team in those years in order to win the Super Bowl, because it often comes down to injuries from one team or another that'll decide that.
Yeah, now I understand that, the Ravens needed to sign OBJ primarily, complimentarily, because it helped them sign Lamar Jackson. But you're saying that even though that was the case, that maybe signing OBJ wasn't the best move considering how the cap space is looking right now?
I from a dollar perspective, I think it's extremely difficult to defend spending $18 million on OBJ between 23 and 24 based on where he's been the last 2 years.
Oof.
I don't think you can justify it. I mean, he's not good enough a player to spend that much money on. Literally playing top tier receiver money just about for 1 year of Odell, and he'll be here for one. That's it, and then he's gone. I don't think you can justify it. And all kinds of out of town friends have been asking me, what the heck is going on with this Baltimore signing? I can't give them an explanation for it. The best explanation is just think of it as an extension of the Lamar Jackson money, and you'll get less frustrated by it. And hopefully, OBJ gives us more than what we have typically gotten out of older receivers that the Ravens have brought in later in their careers.
Yeah, I agree completely. Even though I think that the OBJ signing was I want to say par for the course, but necessary in a standpoint that the Ravens haven't brought in much talent, but with the emergence of Zay Flowers now, along with the Rashad Bateman factor, if he comes back from an injury, maybe they have more than enough talent and receiver, especially with Nelson Aguilar pretty much stepping up so far in camp. OBJ might have been a luxury that they didn't necessarily need. You're absolutely correct. So
the 2 guys you mentioned in particular, those guys, if they're not the number 1 and number 2 receivers for Ravens, it's a very bad thing. Flowers has to be there. He takes the tap off the defenses. He makes everything possible underneath. His suddenness has been just a wonder to look at in camp. And he's the, and arguably he's one of the other players that really just cannot afford to lose under any circumstance. Bateman's the team's best route runner. And I say that even with OBJ coming here with being one of the best route runners in the league for many years. Bateman is a younger guy, obviously, just I think has a little bit more in terms of ability to do that. Certainly brings more speed to the table than OBJ at this point. And I think if OBJ were to mentor those 2, I'm thrilled with it and get some value out of it that way. If OBJ actually takes targets away from Bateman, I think it's probably a bad thing for the Ravens. If he takes them away from Andrews, it might be a bad thing. Who knows? But I think in general, Flowers is the guy. He creates space. He takes the safety away. He hopefully will allow a lot of these receivers to have better seasons.
Agreed. I know you're a great analyst. I mean, I've listened to you for a while now, and that means you paid close attention to the joint practice between the Commanders and the Ravens. Lamar Jackson's been a little inconsistent, and he's had weapons now, the likes of OBJ, to go along with Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Rashad Bateman, and Zay Flowers, as we mentioned. Do you believe this inconsistency is a bit of, I got new weapons, a new system to work with, or are there struggles that we kind of ignored over the last few years that may be on the forefront now that this is going to be most likely a pass-first team?
I'm not sure I divided into those categories. He had a terrible day today. Well,
Yeah.
just an awful day throwing the football. A lot of underthrows on deep balls, a lot of unforced incompletions. So he didn't have a good day today. That's for certain. And we saw that happen, 10 days ago on the 4 interception Saturday he had, where they tried to explain it on, well, it was 3rd and long. Well, no, that explains maybe 1 or 2 of the interceptions. It doesn't explain all 9 of them by the offense that day. I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, there were distractions this offseason. There haven't been in the past. I don't want to blame Lamar for that because he's been the North Star in terms of being an off-season learner at his craft. He's been absolutely wonderful at that. I don't know that I'm ready yet to blame it on Monken and new offensive scheme that is coming in. I tell you what, I'm not buying is the notion that everything is rosy between Monken and Lamar.
Oh, really?
The risk. Yeah, here's the thing. And basically, it can be great. It can be Lamar can be giving him advice. That's fantastic. He could be adding stuff to playback. That's normal. We've seen Brady and Belichick sit down together and come up with a game plan on film. You've probably seen that video before. Mm-hmm. But I think, one of the things that is underscores the potential problem between the two is the wristband thing. Seems trivial. Lamar wants to wear a wristband and he's used to wearing a wristband. And Monken didn't want to because he wants to learn his offense better. What that tells me is Monken really wants a highly structured offense. And he wants Lamar to learn it well, be able to communicate it, and know the terms without having to go to the crutch wristband and parrot the words from that spot. Mm-hmm. What that speaks to is a guy who wants a very structured offense and wants Lamar to stay on a plan to read A, read B. Lamar, his entire value he brings you as a quarterback is playing off structure. Is playing out off schedule, making throws off schedule, taking off and running. That's what he brings you. And if you try and submerge that particular alpha characteristic, you're doing the team a disservice. You're definitely doing Lamar a disservice. And I think if he were to start complaining about Lamar taking off or Lamar making off schedule throws or Lamar leaving the pocket or whatever it might be, I think we'd suddenly start to see friction between those two. It seems like everything is great now, but that particular thing really bothers me about the relationship between the two. So hopefully it works out. And I think winning cures everything. And I don't think there's
say that.
Yeah. The problem is not present yet, but I think that the potential seeing this is a little concerning.
Yeah, and I agree. When I first heard about it, I thought this is trivial. This is why do that? But I guess that's Monken trying to put a stamp on his territory as far as being the OC. But that quickly went away, and I'm sure what you said is correct that there was maybe some back and forth between the two as the season gets started. Okay, well let's move on to the defense because even though I love talking about the new offense because I was such a proponent of change for that offense, but you got to talk about the defense because now it appears as though this is going to be the liability of the team moving forward. And we touched on it a little bit with the Marlon Humphrey injury, but can we talk about a little bit about what we expect as far as someone stepping up? With Rocket Sim dealing with the knee injury and, in my opinion, no clear third cornerback making a name for himself in the first preseason. Have you seen anything in camp or maybe glimpses in the preseason that leads you to believe that someone's going to emerge in that competition as the clear winner?
Yeah, there's no magic silver bullet coming out of camp. I'd say a couple of positive things. They've unwound a number of things already. They unwound the wristbands, they unwound Patrick Ricard at guard, and they unwound Brandon Stevens going to safety. And I think that is one of the big moves is he'll go back to outside corner. He's going to stick there. He's not going anywhere else this season, which first of all is good for Stevens because it's a position he can play, I believe. And I think it makes a lot of sense for him to stick at one position. And the Ravens have tons of safety depth now, as it appears, with some good play from Worley and Stone, and obviously the two starters. So I think right now he might be the Ravens' number one cornerback. And as scary as that sounds, there really isn't anyone else.
I agree. There's no one else really coming in the forefront. Stevens played a little bit last year, and he played well in spots. Mm-hmm. So it is scary to think that there's a possibility that Brandon Stevens is the CB1. But given the injury to Rocket Sim and with Marlon Humphrey, you definitely want somebody with experience over there and someone you think you can rely on in those games to come, especially with Cincinnati coming in week 2. For sure. Let's talk a little bit about Daryl Worley, because he's a guy who looks almost Geno Stone-ish, coming out of nowhere, in my opinion, and really making a name for himself. I know that the depth at safety is a little up for debate a little bit. So him playing 75 snaps, all of the snaps on defense in the first preseason game, does that correlate more to depth in your opinion, or is that them trying to really see what they have of Worley? Because some people think that Worley's on the bubble, but I think he might have cemented himself as a definite addition to the 53-man roster come September.
Yeah, I think he's much more likely to make the team now. But I will say this, that if you're playing a game of which of these ones is not like the other from Sesame Street, when they used to do that,
Yes.
Here are the other players for the Ravens who were on the field in the fourth quarter when Worley made 6 drive-ending or third-down plays. It's an unbelievable set of high-leverage plays that he impacted. The greatest I've ever seen in a preseason.
That you called, by the way. You called it in your podcast.
I called it in advance. I appreciate you bringing that up. But the other guys on the field at the same time were Nichols, Botts, Caesar, Sanders, Ham, Ross, Welch, Kelly, Lucian, Swan, and Mayfield, and Ardarius Washington. So you're talking about a bunch of guys in year 1, year 2. Welch is in year 4. Washington is in year 3. But basically he was a wizard compared to these other whatevers, who are out on the field. Maybe a senior in high school relative is playing with a bunch of 7th graders, and you wonder who's going to take over the game.
Right?
It's just fairly absurd.
That is wild to think of when it comes to his performance, because even though, like you said, he was clearly a man among boys, that still was very impressive to see. Let's talk a little about the pass rush. Odafe Oweh didn't play, but we got a little bit of David Ojabo, and he looked like he was in the moment a little too much. He maybe was pushing a little bit from what I heard from analysts, but I think that, you can correct me because I trust your opinion. His pass rush ability, his moves, as far as pass rush was concerned, was pretty much nullified by the Eagles' offensive line, correct? And I don't know if maybe he performed to the best of his ability in this game, but you can correct me if I'm wrong.
I'll go through what I saw. I think he had 1 pressure. So I think from a pass rush standpoint, in 20 snaps, and those were not all pass snaps, I'm not bothered by him doing that. He has quickness. I think he's going to learn more from Chuck Smith on that. He's got a lot of cleaning up to do in terms of maintaining his spot on the edge. He basically has been giving that up as a pass rusher. If you see a player do that, you want to get better pass rush results than you did. So that's, I think, a fair criticism. But frankly, in this first game, he looked like a situational pass rusher, and I'm afraid that may be what he ends up being this year. It's not a terrible thing by any stretch, and we saw exactly the same thing from Tavius Robinson, the 4th-round pick, is that he's not ready to set the edge, and he's making a lot of mistakes to the overplay the football to the inside, and that was a common theme. It wasn't even those two, but those two were the worst in terms of creating opportunities for runs to go to the outside. So very positive, very bullish on what Ojabo can do for the Ravens this year, and actually very bullish as a pass rusher, given him working with Chuck Smith from now on. But I am, he's before he becomes an every down outside linebacker, he's going to have to learn how to play the run.
Yeah, I agree completely. And, those two coupled together, Odafe Oweh and Ojabo, I think they're going to make some noise in those pass rush situations. But you're right. In those situations where you expect to run and those running backs are gashing you for big yards because you over pursued, it's a recipe to have you be a situational passer, at least early on in the season. Maybe as the season goes on, he gets his swarm together and becomes an every down player. Let's talk about week 2. Preseason 1's in the books. The Washington Commanders are going to head up against the Ravens. I think the Ravens are now in Washington as of now, preparing for that game. Talk about who you see maybe emerging themselves, possibly after the week 1 performance, who you think maybe can push themselves in the pack. It doesn't necessarily have to be corner, which is what I saw, but is there any player that you expect to maybe step up or make a turnaround in week 2 when they didn't do so maybe in week 1?
Okay, well, let's start with who I really, really want to see again, and that is the guy who's the most dominant player on the field, Travis Jones.
Oh, yeah.
He was another man among boys, and those Eagles backup linemen have been there for a while. They're not all these rookies and ones. There's some pretty good guys there, and unbelievable rip move. It looks like he's picked up a lot of strength even from last year. Still has a little bit of problem with double teams, which is why the Ravens were able to get him so cheap out of Connecticut. Was a lot of his tape involved double teams of him, and he's not completely effective against that. But as a one-on-one penetrating player, he's unreal. Just going to take a moment here. Am I under any time constraint here to discuss this briefly?
Oh, no, go for it. This is what you're here for.
So this was what was so great about it. So Jones could not be stopped one-on-one in any block. If I'm Mike McDonald, I'm making every play. I'm thinking about how can I get Jones a one-on-one matchup, which probably means one of the great things they could do is have Pierce as a 1 and Jones at a 3. And the 3 tech, of course, usually gets the guard one-on-one. So you prefer to have Jones in that matchup. If you put him at nose tackle, much higher chance he gets double. You can manufacture a single for him there, but it's a higher chance that he gets double. But wherever he's playing, I'm finding singles for him by scheme if I could do that. And the Eagles in this game were so overpowered by Jones that when they finally got him, they scored their only touchdown of the game. They got a first down at the 2-yard line, I believe, on a short run where Jones was in the game. Then they had, I think, an incomplete pass, and then they scored a 2-yard touchdown run. And on the first and the third of those plays that I just mentioned, each play, they allowed Jones to over-aggress himself into the backfield and then kind of back block him from there. So normally you don't want a defensive lineman in the backfield because you can bifurcate the field for your running back and make it more difficult. But they didn't have any other way to block him. Yeah. So they effectively trapped him in the backfield on both of those plays. And take a look at them. I mean, Jones, if he cleans that up, I mean, it's the only thing that went wrong in his game the whole night. We have so much negative news coming right now of players underperforming that Jones's upside has me really excited. Dafe Owe does too, by the way, but Jones's upside has me really excited.
I have to take a look because I did see him perform well, but you're mentioning 2 very specific plays. I'll go back and look at it and see how he performed, and maybe in week 2 he brings it up again. Let's talk a little bit. Let's go back a little bit to Calais Campbell because I believe his, in my opinion, I was very nervous as a watcher of football to see a guy that talent leave, but the Ravens have some dogs in the defensive line that have really stepped up, and I think Baltimore took their approaches. These guys have really shown some flashes and really dominated in certain instances. Let's see what the young boys have. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, very, very excited about it. See, losing Michael Pierce last year was a huge loss for the team in terms of not having a player who would eat a lot of snaps. And actually, I think it really hurt one player in particular, and that's Matabike, who didn't have completely the season I would have expected. And there are 2 things that were going on with Justin. One is he wasn't playing as well when he played a lot of snaps in a game. And number 2 is he wore down as the season went on. He ended up playing 59% of the snaps. I think he'd be a lot better if you could levelize his snaps and get it down to about 47%, something like that. It's not hard to do, and it's not shouldn't be thought of as a decrease in manhood or is going to reduce his contract in any way. I think he's going to still do very well on the open market. But if you want to really maximize him as a pass rusher, I think he plays less snaps in total, and it'll be interesting to see how they treat that this year. Jones is a guy who played 30% of the snaps last year as a rookie. I think he can play more. And Pierce is a guy, hopefully, who played almost nothing, 4 or 5% of the snaps probably just in from that first game. And he could come back and hopefully play 30 to 40% of the snaps, I would say, and be very effective in there on early downs. Pierce has also been very impressive as a pass rusher this year, which is terrific. Yeah.
Well, I have one more thing to ask you, and it's very trivial, but I have to ask anyway. The Ravens made it 24 straight preseason wins, albeit I feel like a little bit John Harbaugh's, he really wants that win, maybe to build up culture as a winning franchise. But do you see 25 wins in their horizon? Do you think they beat the Commanders in preseason game 2?
I do like the cultural component to it. And do I have to give a short answer to this, or can I give a longer answer?
Go for it. Gets that? Give me the whole spiel.
So I think that this is hard for me to give a short answer. I apologize for that.
No worries.
I think the Ravens do some things in terms of scheme that are concessions to winning the game. So they're going to try and run a play they think is more effective rather than run a play where they really want to test out, can this wide receiver beat this cornerback in a specific man situation? So they're not testing their players or put themselves in difficult blocking situations as like a Brian Billick would talk about. They really are doing more of trying to have plays that are run effectively, particularly in the second half. What they don't have from past years is defensive depth that is really astounding. In particular, cornerback, since they're very weak, that's a potential area of weakness in the second half. But I think 25 in a row is probably more likely than not. And I think all the people who tell me not to bet on the Ravens in preseason, I immediately look at them with a jaundiced eye and get them to try and explain it to me, because it's just whatever they've got is complete garbage.
I completely agree with you. That's a bet I'll be making for sure before the game on against the Commanders. Well, thank you so much, Ken, for joining us. Tell the people at Ravens Talk Podcast where they can find your stuff.
Oh, really appreciate you having me, Sam. I'm at FilmStudyBaltimore.com is where my articles are, including very detailed reports on the offense and defense. I got offensive line scoring for Saleh, Simpson, and Faalele from this last game that gets into specific references of where they made plays, and my scoring metric is out there too. And the defense, same thing, a lot of citations of individual plays, including the two we talked about for Travis Jones. And then the podcast is Film Study Baltimore Ravens Talk, or Film Study Baltimore Ravens Talk, I should say. And it's basically a daily thing at this point for the rest of the football season. I hope you'll take a listen.
Thanks so much, Ken. I'll definitely be tuning in because I learned a lot today, and I consider myself a football guy, but you definitely gave me some things to think about and watch out for in week 2. I appreciate you joining us. You guys, you have the rest of the day. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Sam.
Thank you. All right, folks, that was Ken McKusick from Film Study. His podcast is available anywhere you get your podcast. What a pleasure to have him on. He was definitely insightful on the happenings of the Baltimore Ravens. Before I let you go, we got to talk about one more thing, because I was very curious to see how our boy Todd Monken would perform after giving the reins following the release of Greg Roman as the offensive coordinator. And even though it was a little vanilla, it is preseason, there were some things that I really, really liked. For one, the 11 personnel. For those of you who don't know what 11 personnel is, that's pretty much having a one running back and one tight end. In 2022, the Ravens had that personnel out on the field 10% of the time. 10%. That means 90% of the time they had 2 receivers or less on the field. Dead last in the National Football League. Horrendous. Makes me sleep just thinking about it. But in week 1 of the preseason, the Ravens ran that 11 personnel 84%. Good for 4th in the National Football League. That's a huge jump. Now, the flash players may have not been there. I did see some really, really nice things as far as red zone plays are concerned. But just that notion, the fact that we're going to have 3 wide receivers out on the field at any given moment, the majority of the game, with having OBJ out there and Zay Flowers, maybe a little Nelson Aguilar, and of course Rashad Bateman, makes me very happy. I'll be up and at 'em. I'll be up and ready to go. So keep it coming, Todd Monken. Make sure that Lamar Jackson gets his touchdowns. Maybe curb this running back only mantra that has plagued the Ravens in the National Football League for years. But very, very good stuff I saw in week 1, and I expect more of the same in week 2. Now, before I let you guys go, I would love for you guys to follow me on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Ravens Talk Podcast. We are available. Bring on your questions. I would love to answer them on air. Having our guests, our very, very, very intelligent guests that you saw today, come on the show and try and answer it for you. So that's Ravens Talk Podcast on Instagram, Ravens Talk Pod on Twitter, Ravens Talk Podcast on YouTube, and Ravens Talk Podcast everywhere else. Apple, Amazon, Spotify, you name it, we're there for you. I appreciate you guys coming on today. Enjoy week 2 of the National Football League, especially the Ravens versus Commanders, as the Ravens look to try and make it 25 straight wins. I'm making the bet. I hope you do too. It's easy money. That's it for us here. I'm your host, Samuel Njoku. See you next week.